I mean, I know in the common literature, there's a lot of things about electromagnetic effects on the human body.
Yes.
And what happens there. And I'd be kind of leery of jumping to conclusions about any of that. I would tend to be on the kind of the side that, one of the things is, like, for example, whether, transmission of electrical lines along electrical lines affects people living nearby them. When you look at the numbers, I haven't done this in a long time, but I have before in the past. When you look at the numbers in terms of the size or the magnitudes of the fields involved and how they could affect you, it turns out they're very small. They would have to be very large to make much happen. I mean, you can look, for example, at one of a common medical device, the magnetic resonance imaging that's used a lot.
Sure, the MRI.
Yeah, they use very large magnetic fields around there to, in fact, flip protons in atoms to try to do some of the imaging in the body, and they use, in fact, very large fields. Now, they can, by looking at the resonances involved there with the fields that they put through there, they can, in fact, do some very good job of imaging what's going on in the body. But even those size fields, which are a lot larger than sort of casual power line kind of things, or maybe cell phones by your ear kind of thing, doesn't have very much effect on your health or well-being. And so I would tend to view that from the physical point of view that's not going to be much of an effect.
My main question was, I mean, I appreciate what you just said, but my main question was, in your experience and in your expertise, do you see us, humans, as electrical in nature?
Well, yes. In that sense, I was kind of getting at. Yeah.
Okay.
That certainly our thinking and everything we do in terms of all the nerve impulses and how everything's put together, absolutely is electrical in nature. I mean, there's certainly that's certainly true.
I had an interesting conversation with Dr. Simeon Hine at the Institute of Resonance in Boulder, Colorado, and at one part we were talking about the brain and how a lot of times when you think you're making the decision to do something, it's already been made like a second or less than that before you think you made it.
Well, it should be. I mean,
it's very interesting.
Yeah, well, the brain is a very mysterious area, Los, and we have a long way to go before we fully understand what's going on in there. I would certainly agree with that.
Well, what can we do to get your new cone theory to be received and understood in the circles that it would most benefit?
Well, that's a good question. Certainly, I think, venues like we're doing right here in terms of just getting the information out, I would like to see people sort of, just decide for themselves. I'm not proselytizing and say, hey, you have to believe this or believe that. I mean, I want people, of course, to decide for themselves. What the biggest problem I probably had is that getting the current cadre of vision researchers to actually take enough time to actually look at something different and say maybe that could, in fact, address a lot of the problems of understanding that they're having in the current field. It wouldn't hurt to go through sort of a general kind of venue like we're doing here and have people say, hey, listen, there's something to this, and let's take a look at it. That's the kind of thing that needs to be done.
Anytime new knowledge is introduced, it ruffles the feathers of the current knowledge and operating paradigms of everybody involved. Unless people are deeply dedicated to learning and continuing to be in the realm of discovery, you're basically inviting resistance and opposition, etc. That's what happens when you bring in a new paradigm or a new model for something. But there's got to be people in the vision field that are really excited about learning no matter what, even if everything they learned is wrong or something they learned is wrong. And those are the people that are going to be the front runners for this. That's
exactly right. I mean, you got to have people who are willing to take risks, in effect, and say that they're willing to look at different ways of looking at things, and some of those different ways may be right, and some of those different ways may be wrong, but at least a lot of them are worth a look.
You have a website called what?
I got a lot of the concepts that are related to this in a website called Cone, all one word, Cones and Color, all lowercase, conesandcolor.net.
Okay, so those of you who are listening, for those of you who want to read further into John's model, you can go to conesandcolor.net, and it's pretty thorough there. And also, for those of you who are fascinated with this, you can pick up the book Cone Shape and Color Vision, Unification of Structure and Perception by John Medeiros. John, do you have anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I think we kind of covered a lot of the key concepts. And as folks look at it for themselves, one of the things that they should be looking at in terms of the models, one of the aspects we hadn't talked about, which was of how you put that information together, that I say is distributed along the cone, and that's done with sort of timing information. And that's a whole other issue. But that's one that's kind of fun to look at and relates to the whole area of understanding a lot of the sort of the mysterious effects in color vision that are not understood now and are clarified by the model. And I think I would point people to look in that direction.
Are you saying that there's almost like a timing sensor?
Yes. If we want to take a couple minutes, I can mention a couple things about
it. Please do.
Well, like I said, okay, you have the colors spread along the length of the cone. And the trick is, how do you get that information out? And I think what happens is that it's done that by converting to a time code. And if you can visualize what happens here is light shines down into the cone. The red, if you like, is only in the top wide part of the cone, green in the middle, blue down at the far end. And these signals have to get out. And they take time to get out. And the signals that would come out soonest would be the red signals, green would come out later, and blue come out latest. Now, in order to make that work, you have to have a way of synchronizing this information. And what's been a really fascinating aspect of vision is that makes this work is something called microsaccades. Now, I don't want to be too technical here, but this is actually kind of interesting in the sense that it was discovered about 50 years ago that your eye, when you think you're looking directly at something, is in fact jittering around a little bit. Now, very small motions are going on. And when people discovered this, they thought, wow, that's kind of weird. And maybe it's just the sort of residual instabilities of the pointing mechanism of the eye that kind of points it in a given direction. And so they thought, well, if we could stabilize those motions by fixing the image right on the retina so that these motions are taken out, that vision should be a lot better. And in fact, this has been done, and what you find is that not only does vision not get better, it in fact gets very much worse, and you in fact go blind.
Wow. If
the image is exactly stabilized on the retina, you wind up seeing nothing. That the eye, in fact, has to have this, the image, in fact, jitters in a very small amount, but it jitters always on the retina.
When you say jitters, do you mean like flickering, very subtle flickering?
Well, it moves.
Okay.
It's moving back and forth. It's jumping back and forth. In fact, about 10 times a second on average, it jumps around. And it turns out on each jitter, if you like, the reading, I think happens, in fact, the reading of color information refreshes on every one of these jitters. If you think about the scene moving across your retina, if a border in color moves across the retina, it refreshes and you can start reading again what colors are involved.
That's almost like a computer.
Well, it basically is.
Like a resonant program or something that refreshes.
Yeah, I mean, and it turns out that this mechanism enables you to correlate the timing of the signals. What comes out first is red, and what comes out latest is blue, with this kind of spread along their length. And something we had talked about before, and I mentioned in my book, is this thing called Benham's top. And I don't want to get into it in much detail, but it turns out there's a device that people have known about for a long time that it consists of a half black, half white disc with some arcs on the white half. And when you spin this disc, purely black and white disc, that gets colors appearing on these